The war ended within hours after humans joined. The galaxy was burning. A war that had lasted for decades had turned entire star systems into graveyards. The Zalvari Dominion and the Vornak Empire, two of the most powerful civilizations in the known universe, were locked in a conflict that refused to end. Neither side could win. Neither side could surrender. It had started over a single disputed world. But now, it had become a war of survival. Millions had died in the crossfire. Planets had been reduced to dust. The galactic community begged for peace. But peace was impossible. Because the Zalvari and the Vornak hated each other too much to stop. And so, the war continued. Until humanity joined. A war that could never end. The war had gone on for so long that even the Zalvari and Vornak couldn't remember how it had started. They had fought on every battlefield imaginable, in space, on planets, through asteroid belts and black holes. Entire fleets had been destroyed and rebuilt. Entire generations had been born and died without seeing peace. It was a war of attrition, a war where neither side was strong enough to win, but both were too stubborn to quit. And the galaxy watched in horror, knowing there was no end in sight, until humanity sent a message. A message that changed everything. The message that ended the war. Humanity had stayed out of the war for decades. They were a young species, small, insignificant in the eyes of the great empires. But they had watched. They had listened. They had learned. And finally, they had seen enough. One day, without warning, a human transmission appeared on every screen across the galaxy. It was simple. It contained no threats, no demands, no conditions, only 4 words. We'll end this. And the war stopped. Not because the Zalvari or the Vornak wanted peace, but because they were afraid. Because deep down, in the darkest corners of their war councils, they all whispered the same thing. What happens if the humans take a side? The unthinkable becomes reality. For the first time in decades, both the Zalvari and the Vornak paused, not because they wanted to, but because humanity had never spoken before. They had been silent, watching, and, now out of nowhere, they had decided to act. Why? What had changed? No one knew. No one understood. But there was one universal truth that every species in the galaxy agreed on. Humans never bluff. And if humanity had finally decided to enter the war, then the war was already over. The countdown begins. The Zalvari sent spies. The Vornak sent scouts. Both factions searched for any sign of human fleets preparing for war. They found nothing. No battleships, no armies, no signs of a military buildup. Yet the war slowed down. Commanders hesitated. Generals delayed their offensives. Everyone was waiting to see what humanity would do. And then, one day, the first human ship arrived. Just one. A single warship. A vessel smaller than the smallest scout ship in either faction's fleet. But as soon as it entered the battlefield, the war was over. For decades, the Zalvari Dominion and the Vornak Empire had fought each other. At first, it was about resources. Then it became about territory. Then it became about vengeance. Until finally it became about nothing at all. A war that had no goal, no meaning, no end. Just 2 civilizations, locked in an eternal struggle, neither willing to surrender, neither able to win. And so, the galaxy suffered. The war that consumed everything. The war spread like a virus. Neutral systems became battlegrounds. Peaceful colonies became fortresses. Trade routes became minefields. The war devoured entire civilizations. Smaller nations were forced to choose a side or be destroyed. Refugees filled the stars, fleeing from the endless destruction. Entire worlds were bombarded into extinction. It was no longer a war between two empires. It had become a war against the galaxy itself, and the worst part, neither side could win. A war of equals. The Zalvari were masters of energy-based warfare. Their ships were sleek, fast, and precise. They relied on advanced shielding and long-range strikes. The Vornak, on the other hand, were unstoppable tanks. Their fleets were heavy, brutal, and nearly indestructible. They fought with raw firepower, overwhelming their enemies. They were opposites, and that's what made the war impossible to end. For every Zalvari fleet that destroyed a Vornak formation, a Vornak reinforcement wave crushed another Zalvari world. For every planet conquered, another was lost. It was perfect balance, and perfect balance meant no end. The galaxy's despair. The Galactic Council, a once powerful governing body, had tried to negotiate peace. They had sent diplomats. They had imposed sanctions. They had tried everything, but the war only grew worse, and so the galaxy gave up. They accepted that this war would last forever, that there was no solution, that the Zalvari and Vornak were doomed to fight until nothing remained. The war had become a force of nature, unstoppable, unbreakable, until humanity joined. The impossible intervention. The Zalvari and Vornak had spent years ignoring humanity. To them, humans were insignificant. A minor species from the HFY, edge of the galaxy. Small, weak, irrelevant. But when the humans sent their message, when they said they would end the war, the entire galaxy held its breath. Because if there was one thing everyone knew about humans, it was this. They do not enter wars to lose. And the moment humanity stepped onto the battlefield, the war was already over. The call for help. Humanity had stayed out of the war for decades. They had no interest in conquest. They had no ancient grudges. They had no reason to fight. But they had watched. They had seen worlds burn. They had seen billions die. They had seen an entire galaxy drowning in war. And for a long time they did nothing, because this war was not their fight, until it was. The pleas that fell on deaf ears. The Galactic Council had begged the Zalvari and the Vornak to stop. They sent diplomats. They offered peace treaties, alliances, ceasefires. They tried everything, and every time, they were ignored. Because the Zalvari and the Vornak did not want peace. They wanted revenge. They wanted total victory, even if it meant their own destruction. The desperation of a broken galaxy. One by one, the smaller civilizations turned to humanity, not because they thought humans could win, not because they thought humans were strong, but because humanity was the only species that had never been in a galactic war. They were neutral, uninvolved, unscarred. They were the only ones left who could act. And so, one by one, the desperate factions sent their pleas. Help us. Stop this. Do something. And finally, humanity answered. The message that changed everything. The human fleet did not deploy warships. They did not prepare armies. They did not declare war. Instead, they sent a single transmission. It was short, simple, uncompromising. We will end this war, one way or another. And the galaxy froze, because humans were many things. Diplomatic, innovative, unpredictable. But one thing they had never been was liars. If humans said they would do something, they would do it. And that terrified everyone. The Zelvari and Vornak. Response: at first both factions laughed. The humans think they can stop us? They don't even have a proper fleet. They are nothing. But deep down there was doubt, because humanity had done something no one else had dared to do. They had not begged. They had not negotiated. They had not pleaded for peace. They had declared an outcome. And now, both sides were waiting to see what would happen next. Waiting to see if humanity was serious. Waiting to see if the war was truly about to end. And then, one day a single human warship arrived. Just one. A vessel smaller than the smallest scout ship in either faction's fleet. It had no weapons. No shields. No fleet following behind it. But as soon as it entered the battlefield, the war began to collapse. The power of the unknown. The Zelvari and Vornak both sent messages. State your purpose. Identify yourself. Leave this system or be destroyed. The human ship did not respond. Instead, it simply broadcast one final message to both factions. A message that was not a threat. It was a promise. You will surrender. And within hours, they did. Humanity's arrival. The war was at its peak. The Zelvari and Vornak had spent decades building war machines, deploying fleets, and wiping entire civilizations off the map. The galaxy had watched helplessly, knowing there was no stopping the carnage. Then, humanity arrived, not with battleships, not with superweapons, not with armies, just a single ship. One lone human vessel, barely larger than a scout frigate, dropped out of warp in the heart of the battlefield. Both sides paused. For a brief moment in the middle of a war that had lasted for generations, there was silence. And then, the message came through. A declaration of finality. The human ship broadcasted one transmission across every Zelvari and Vornak channel. It was not a warning. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. This war ends today. For the first time in galactic history, both factions stopped fighting because they did not know what was coming next, and that terrified them. The psychological warfare begins. The Zelvari and Vornak were not afraid of war. They had fought countless battles. They had conquered planets, exterminated species, and faced impossible odds. But this was different, because humanity wasn't playing by the same rules. They hadn't sent a grand fleet. They hadn't deployed armies. They hadn't even fired a single shot. They had simply arrived, and they had said, with absolute certainty, the war is over. And now, both factions were forced to ask themselves a horrifying question. What do the humans know that we don't? The first signs of collapse at. First, the Zelvari High Command laughed. A single ship? They're bluffing. They ordered their fleet to fire. Every Zelvari warship locked weapons on the human vessel. Torpedoes were launched. Energy cannons roared to life. An entire fleet opened fire. And then, nothing. The weapons never hit their target. The missiles vanished before impact. The energy blast dissipated into empty space, and in that instant, the Zelvari stopped laughing. Because this was not normal, this was not possible, and now, they were afraid. The human war machine without weapons. The Vornak, watching the disaster unfold, held their fire. For the first time, they chose caution over brute force. Because something was wrong. The humans weren't fighting. They weren't dodging, weren't defending, weren't even moving. Yet somehow they were winning. How? The Vornak warlord sent spies. They hacked human databases, intercepted transmissions, tried to uncover the truth. And what they found made them panic. Humanity's real power. Humans had no superweapons, no secret fleets hidden in deep space, no biological plagues or doomsday devices. Instead, they had something far worse. They had understood their enemies better than their enemies understood themselves. For decades, humanity had studied Zalvari and Vornak war strategies. They had infiltrated their communication networks. They had mapped out their supply chains, exposed their weaknesses, and predicted their next moves before they even happened. They had waited, and now, at the perfect moment, they had let the war collapse on itself. The illusion of control shatters. Within minutes of the human ship's arrival, chaos spread like wildfire. The Zalvari received false orders, sent through what they believed was their own command structure. Entire fleets turned against each other. The Vornak's supply lines failed. Their reinforcements sent to the wrong locations. Their strongest fortresses were left undefended. Their leaders were fed misinformation, causing them to make disastrous decisions. And yet humanity did not fire a single shot. The war was ending itself, and the Zalvari and Vornak finally realized they had already lost. The final warning as both factions struggled to regain control. The human ship sent one last transmission. This is your only chance. A pause. Lay down your arms. Another pause. Or we will finish what you started. The message was not a threat. It was a promise. And within hours, the war was over. The war had lasted for decades, a war that consumed entire civilizations, a war that the galaxy believed would never end. And now, it was over. Not in years, not in months, not even in days. The war ended in hours, because the moment humanity stepped in, the rules changed, and neither the Zalvari nor the Vornak knew how to fight this kind of war. The first battle ends before it begins. The first real battle after humanity's arrival lasted 6 minutes. The Zalvari fleet had been preparing an offensive against the Vornak, a massive armada of warships, loaded with planet-killer weapons ready to obliterate an entire star system. They never got the chance. Moments before they jumped into battle, their engines failed, their shields dropped, their targeting systems locked onto their own allies. Then, the Vornak fleet, who should have launched a counterattack, received orders to retreat. Orders that no one had given. Confusion spread like wildfire. Zalvari warships fired upon each other. Vornak commanders screamed into their comms, demanding answers. No one understood what was happening, and then every single ship received the same transmission. The war is over. And just like that, it was. The collapse of the chain of command wars are not just fought with weapons. They are fought with information, with coordination, with trust. Humanity knew this better than anyone. So they didn't destroy fleets. They didn't wipe out armies. Instead, they destroyed communication. The Zalvari High Command issued orders to attack, only for those orders to vanish. The Vornak warlords tried to mobilize reinforcements, only for their ships to never arrive. Entire fleets went silent. Supply chains were cut. Weapon systems deactivated mid-battle, and no one knew why. The greatest trick humanity ever pulled. The Zalvari and Vornak thought they had been at war with each other. They never realized they had also been fighting a war against humanity. Because for years humanity had been preparing. They had infiltrated both factions' networks. They had mapped every supply route, every strategic point, every weakness. And now, at the perfect moment, they let the war destroy itself. Ships turned against each other, believing their own allies were traitors. Elite squadrons were sent into traps that shouldn't have existed. Entire legions were abandoned on hostile planets, their support fleets redirected elsewhere, and in less than a day, the Zalvari and Vornak stopped fighting, not because they wanted to, but because they no longer had the ability to. The moment of realization, the Zalvari Supreme Commander and the Vornak High Warlord both reached the same conclusion at the same time. We are not in control anymore. Humanity is. And for the first time in history, both factions sent a joint transmission to humanity, to the new power of the galaxy. We surrender. And the reply? Good. The aftermath of an instant victory, the war that had lasted for decades, ended in a single day. The Zalvari and Vornak were forced into peace, not because they wanted peace, but because they had no choice. Their fleets were intact, their armies were still standing, but they had lost everything else. Their command structures, their supply chains, their ability to function as military forces. They were not defeated, they were rendered obsolete. And now, the galaxy held its breath. Because if humanity could do this to the two most powerful factions in the universe, what else could they do? The galaxy watches and fear news of humanity's instant victory spread like wildfire. Warlords who had once dreamed of galactic conquest fell silent. Empires who had once believed themselves superior to humans suddenly wanted peace treaties. Because, no, they understood. Humanity had not won through firepower. They had won through understanding, through strategy, through knowing their enemies better than their enemies knew themselves, and that was far more terrifying than any superweapon. The final warning before the dust could settle, humanity sent one last message to the entire galaxy. It was short, simple, uncompromising. We do not seek war. A pause. We do not seek conquest. Another pause. But if war comes again, a final pause. We will finish it. And with that, the humans vanished from the battlefield, leaving behind a galaxy that would never underestimate them again. The war was over. Not in years, not in months, in hours. No fleets had been destroyed, no planets had been bombed, no superweapons had been fired. Yet the Zalvari and Vornak, the two most powerful empires in the galaxy, had surrendered. And now, the rest of the galaxy was left in shock. Because if humanity could do that to them, what else were they capable of? The silence after the storm. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was at peace. But it was not a comfortable peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after a natural disaster. The kind that comes not from relief, but from fear. Because no one had expected this outcome. Everyone had believed the war would last forever. But now it was over, and it had been ended by a species that most had ignored, most had dismissed, most had considered unimportant. But now, those same rulers, those same warlords, those same arrogant empires were terrified. The unseen superpower humanity had always been viewed as a minor species, too young, too small, too inexperienced to matter. They had never fielded massive fleets. They had never waged galactic wars. They had never sought power. And yet they had just forced peace upon two civilizations that had been at war for generations, without a single battle, without a single casualty. That meant one thing. Humanity was dangerous, not because of their weapons, not because of their numbers, not because of their technology, but because they understood war better than anyone else. And that made them the most feared species in the universe. The panic in the great empires, in the halls of power across the galaxy, emergency meetings were called. The great warlords, the ancient rulers, the undefeated empires all gathered to discuss one thing: the humans. What do they want? How did they do this? Are they a threat? For the first time in history, the most powerful beings in the galaxy felt small, because they had always believed power came from fleets and armies. But humanity had just proven there was something stronger: control. And that was something no fleet, no empire, no ruler could defend against. The Treaty of Silence. Many leaders wanted to strike first, to eliminate humanity before they became a threat. But no one dared to act. Because the truth was, no one understood how humanity had won. If they attacked now, what would happen? Would their fleets turn against them like the Zalvaris had? Would their warships fail before the first battle? Would they even see humanity coming? They didn't know, and that terrified them more than anything else. So, they did nothing. Instead, the great empires of the galaxy signed an unspoken agreement. No wars, no invasions, no conflicts. Because if humanity was watching, they would end it before it even began. The growing fear. Even the most powerful species in the galaxy were afraid to speak humanity's name. They referred to them as the Ghost Fleet, a force that didn't need weapons to win, a force that didn't need battles to conquer, a force that had turned war itself into a weapon. The Zalvari and Vornak never recovered. Their empires were broken, humiliated, and across the stars, everyone else took notice. Because warlords, dictators, and conquerors only understand one thing: power, and humanity had just proven they had more of it than anyone else. The final question. The galaxy was no longer concerned with war. They were no longer concerned with territory, resources, or expansion. They were concerned with one thing: what does humanity want? Because in all their history, the most dangerous species had always been the ones who wanted something: power, glory, revenge. But humanity had taken control of the galaxy, and then disappeared. They had not claimed land. They had not demanded tribute. They had not forced their rule upon others. They had simply ended the war, and then they had left. That was the most terrifying part of all, because it meant that when humanity fought, they didn't do it for power. They did it because they chose to, and if they chose to do it again, no one would be able to stop them. The galaxy was at peace, but it was a peace built on fear: fear of one species, fear of one power, fear of humans. Not because they ruled, not because they conquered, not because they demanded anything, but because they didn't. The unchallenged superpower, the Zalvari and Vornak, were shattered, their war machines dismantled, their fleets dismembered, their leaders disgraced. And yet humanity took nothing. They did not claim territory. They did not force treaties. They did not establish dominance. They simply left. And that made them more powerful than any empire had ever been. The race for favor. The galaxy shifted overnight. For centuries, empires had fought for control. Now they fought for something else. They fought for humanity's favor. Trade agreements, alliances, scientific cooperation. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be on humanity's good side, not because they wanted to befriend them, but because they were too afraid to be their enemy. The paranoia of the warlords of the great empires gathered in secret. They discussed one thing: how do we control them? But that was the problem. Humanity could not be controlled. They had no central leader. They had no imperial ambitions. They had no desire for conquest. They were unpredictable. and that made them unstoppable. The failed attempts to weaken humanity, some factions tried to fight back. Not with war, but with covert sabotage. They sent spies. They sent hacked transmissions. They tried to manipulate the galactic economy to weaken humanity. Every attempt failed. Every infiltrator vanished. Every plan collapsed before it could even begin. And each time, the message would appear. You should stop. It was never a threat. It was never an attack. But it was enough. Because those who ignored the warning were never heard from again. The hidden power of humanity. Humanity had not just won a war. They had done something far worse. They had rewritten the rules of war itself. No one could challenge them. No one could predict them. No one could stop them, because humanity did not rule through force. They ruled through knowledge, through understanding, through knowing exactly how their enemies thought, before their enemies even acted. And that meant one thing: they would always be one step ahead. The new galactic order, the Zalvari and Vornak, were no longer the dominant forces of the galaxy. Humanity was. Not by conquest, not by war, not by force, but by proving that no one could challenge them. Because in the end, the most powerful empire is not the one that rules through fear. It is the one that never needs to rule at all. The final question. The greatest minds of the galaxy gathered for one final discussion. Not about how to stop humanity. Not about how to fight them. Not about how to control them, because they knew none of that was possible. Instead, they asked themselves one thing: what will the humans do next? Because for the first time in history, the fate of the galaxy was no longer in their hands. It was in humanity's. And that meant one thing: the future belonged to them, whether the galaxy was ready or not. The war was over. The galaxy had changed. But humanity? Humanity remained a mystery. They had ended a war that no one else could stop. They had shattered empires without firing a shot. They had rewritten the rules of power without claiming any for themselves. And then, they disappeared. No conquest. No expansion. No demands. Just silence. The legend of humanity. Across the stars, the name human became something else. For some, it was a warning. For others, it was a symbol of fear. To the warlords who once ruled with absolute power, it was a reminder that no empire was untouchable. To the civilizations that had suffered under endless wars, it was proof that even the impossible could be undone. But to those who truly understood, it was something else entirely. A question, a mystery, a shadow that never left. Because the galaxy knew that if war ever returned, so would they. The final transmission years after the war ended, a message appeared, a single broadcast. It spread across every star system, appearing on every screen, in every language. No one could trace its origin. No one knew where it had come from, but everyone saw it. A human voice. Cold. Calm. Absolute. We were never the strongest. A pause. We were never the fastest. Another pause. We were never the most powerful. And then, but we never lose. The message ended. The screens went dark, and the galaxy understood. This was not a threat. This was a reminder. The end of war. From that day forward, no empire dared to start another war. No species sought conquest, because they all knew what would happen. It would begin like before, with political disputes, with border conflicts, with small-scale battles. And then, the moment humanity got involved, it would end. Not in months, not in weeks, not in days, in hours, Because war had a price, and humanity had already collected once. No one wanted to see what would happen if they had to collect again. The shadow that watches humanity faded into the background. Their fleets were rarely seen. Their planets were left untouched. Their power remained unspoken. But everyone knew they were still watching. That somewhere in the dark, beyond the edge of known space, humanity was waiting for the day someone made the same mistake again, waiting for the moment when war returned. And when it did, the galaxy knew exactly how it would end. The final words a traveler once asked an old Zelvari scholar a question where, "Did the humans go?" The scholar only smiled and he replied, "They never left. They are simply waiting for the next fool to test them."